Hello everyone, this is Dr. Ray Mao. Today, I will introduce our paper, The Evolution of Philosophy, a Metaphorical Cognition Perspective. The central idea of this work is that philosophy does not develop only through explicit arguments, doctrines, or schools of thought. It also develops through deeper cognitive structures, especially metaphorical concept mappings that shape how philosophers understand abstract ideas. In this paper, we use a computational framework called temporal to analyze philosophical text at scale so that we can examine how concept mappings evolve across philosophers, schools, and historical periods. Let me begin with the motivation. Traditional histories of philosophy usually describe the field through chronology, major thinkers, schools, and themes. That gives us a valuable understanding of history, but it does not fully explain the underlying cognitive structures that organize philosophical reasoning. What is still missing is a systematic corpus-based way to study how philosophers conceptualize abstract domains. Our work addresses this gap by combining conceptual metaphor theory with AI-based metaphor processing, allowing us to investigate philosophy not only as a set of claims, but also as a cognitive system of structured conceptual mappings. Based on this motivation, the paper tries to answer three main research questions. First, how has metaphorical cognition evolved across historical periods in philosophy? Second, how can philosophers from different schools be positioned in terms of their metaphorical cognition? And third, which target domains, source domains, and concept mappings are most characteristic of each philosophical school? These questions allow us to move across three levels of analysis: diachronic change, intellectual positioning, and school-specific cognitive signatures. The analysis is based on a philosophy corpus containing roughly 300,000 sentences drawn from more than 50 classical books in philosophy. The corpus spans from 350 BCE to 1985. It includes major schools and traditions such as Plato, Aristotle, rationalism, empiricism, German idealism, communism, capitalism, phenomenology, continental philosophy, and analytic philosophy, with additional school-level analysis including Stoicism, Nietzsche, and feminism. This broad temporal and intellectual coverage allows us to study both continuity and divergence in the history of philosophical cognition. In terms of corpus statistics, the scale of the extracted conceptual system is quite substantial. We identified 2,039 unique target concepts, 2,644 unique source concepts, and 15,988 unique concept mappings. These numbers are important because they show that philosophy can be modeled at multiple layers. We can ask what philosophers talk about, what source domains they rely on to structure abstract reasoning, and how these targets and the sources are linked through mappings. This provides a much richer picture than topic analysis alone. The computational backbone of this work is the metaphor system. The first step is metaphor identification, where the system detects metaphorical expressions in sentences. The second step is metaphor interpretation, where those metaphorical expressions are paraphrased into their literal counterparts. The third step is concept mapping generation, where the system extracts target concepts, source concepts, and mappings between them. MetaPro allows us to convert large-scale philosophical text into structured cognitive data, making it possible to analyze philosophy computationally from a metaphorical cognition perspective. Once these conceptual mappings are extracted, we apply three kinds of analysis. For historical dynamics, we compute year-level cosine distance series relative to a global centroid, which helps us understand how far each period is from the overall conceptual center of the corpus. For philosophical positioning, we construct author centroids and project them into a two-dimensional space using PCA, while also mirroring within author dispersion. For school signatures, we use normalized-frequency heatmaps to identify the most salient target concepts, source concepts, and concept mappings in each tradition. These analyses let us move from macro-level history to meso-level schools and micro-level author profiles. The first research question and its associated finding concern long-run historical evolution. Across targets, sources, and concept mappings, the paper finds a gradual long-term convergence from classical philosophy towards late modernity. Each period shows greater dispersion, suggesting higher conceptual heterogeneity. The 18th and the 19th centuries show stronger consolidation, while the 20th century introduces renewed variability. The interpretation is that philosophical cognition becomes increasingly organized around entrenched schemas over time, but later expands again as new social, political, and scientific domains enter philosophical discourse and influence conceptual organization. We also examine some notable historical outliers. Stoicism tends to fall below the historical mean because it emphasizes inwardness, self-regulation, discipline, and ascetic control. Communism stands out in a different way because it relies heavily on industrial, material, and conflict-oriented source domains, including production, machinery, and struggle. By contrast, phenomenology and feminism often appear near or above the historical mean because they recombine widely shared embodied and communicative schemas in distinctive but still broadly connected ways. These cases show that historical movement is not random, it reflects different cognitive orientations embodied in each tradition. The broader interpretation of this first research question is that the historical trajectory resembles an S-curve of convergence. This is not simply a story in which one metaphor system replaces another in a linear progression. Instead, philosophy seems to display a centripetal tendency towards consolidation around a shared embodied and communicative backbone, while also showing centrifugal experimentation at certain moments and within certain schools. In other words, philosophical history is both stable and dynamic, stable in its recurring conceptualization foundations, and dynamic in its capacity for new conceptual recombinations. The second major finding concerns the positioning of philosophy. Plato and Aristotle appear close to the overall center, functioning as a kind of classical hub in the conceptual space. Rationalists and empiricists also cluster nearby, which suggests that, despite their epistemological disagreement, they share a broad orientation around mind, representation, and order. German idealists move towards themes of self-activity and normativity. Phenomenologists remain relatively central, but they emphasize embodiment and word involvement. Continental thinkers combine embodiment with discourse and power, while analytic philosophers from a relatively compact yet more outlying cluster shaped by logic, semantics, and evidential reasoning. One especially interesting case is the analytic cluster. Analytic philosophers such as Russell, Wittgenstein, Quine, Criqui, and Lewis appear relatively compact and somewhat distant from other schools. The paper interprets this not as an absence of cognition, but as a comparatively more metaphorist surface style where philosophical work privileges logical structure, formal inference, semantics, and evidential status. Nietzsche is also relatively distant, but for a very interesting reason. His writings reorganize philosophy around genealogy, force, valuation, and style, producing a distinct conceptual signature that does not align neatly with either the classical center or the analytic pattern. The third major finding concerns school signatures. Many schools share similar target domains, such as action and state, and many also share source domains, such as situation and communication. But the clearest distinction emerge at the level of concept mappings. For example, empiricism is strongly associated with mappings such as perception is knowing. German idealism shows mappings like state is quality. Phenomenology presents mappings such as perspective is sense. Analytic philosophy emphasizes credibility is fact. Continental philosophy tends towards mappings like agreement is authority. Communism shows patterns such as physical is power, while feminism includes mappings like success is journey. So even when schools discuss similar topics, they often structure those topics through different cognitive logics. This leads to the core takeaway of the paper. The strongest claim is that school identity is best captured not by target and source domains alone, but by the mappings that connect them. Different traditions may talk about many of the same philosophical concerns, yet what distinguishes them is how they project one domain onto another in order to organize reasoning. This is why metaphorical cognition offers a powerful explanatory framework for both continuity and differentiation in the history of philosophy. It helps us understand not only what philosophers think about, but also how their conceptual systems make those thoughts possible. Thanks for listening.